Long. So, Brian, if you are ready, let's go. Boom. There you are.
Hey,
Brian, good for you, man, for just adapting on the fly to this. We're like, oh, sorry, that YouTube channel didn't work. Flip over to this one. Then your channel got lost. You had to call back. We're doing it.
absolutely.
Right on. And you've had quite a morning. I think this is your fourth interview, isn't it?
Today is an unusual day.
Yeah,
So
you're like
yes, it is my fourth day. Fourth
you're
one
like a
today.
superstar. I'm just like
No,
honored to be in
no,
your presence, Brian.
no.
Okay.
Oh man.
True story though, Brian. I want to say, and for anyone listening, you are really a hero in my life. You have a very special place in my life, especially, in the whole era of the 90s and the 2000s when you were a young worship leader yourself and I was young. I mean, I was just immersed in a totally different way of singing and worshiping and all of that. And then came along these songs like Whatever Is True and Eternity. I don't even know if you wrote all those songs, but you sang them all on some of those early albums, and huge impact in my life. I don't even know if anybody listening here remembers some of those old songs. Maybe they do from your recent. You had a recent album that you just re-recorded some of those, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah, in 2019 we did an
Yeah.
album called Faithful One. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. Like, what does it feel like to talk about songs from that whole era? Does it feel like a whole lifetime ago, or what's kind of like goes on in your heart and your spirit when I bring up songs like, Refiner's Fire and I don't know, Faithful One. I mean, Faithful One is still just a legendary song that so many are singing today, but what does that old era feel like for you?
Well, it's a part of my story. It's kind
Yeah,
of like songs maybe are like, those rings on a tree, right?
yeah.
Like you have years of growth, right? And you can look back if you slice through a tree, you see, 40 or 80 or 100 years, and you see in the rings of a tree like maybe one year there was a fire, right? So the whole ring has got some charcoal on it,
Yeah.
and is that all the scars and the different things that happen. And songs emerge out of seasons and out of the way we respond to both the good things and the hard things, the suffering, and I mean a
Mm-hmm.
lot of songs are birthed in suffering. So this is the way that I responded in that season of my life, and to have still some of those songs being sung now is kind of amazing
It
because
is kind of amazing.
but it's like they're singing my my part of my story from 30 years ago,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? That feeling of like, I wonder what it would be like to sing. I have new parts of my story now, right? Like
Yeah.
and so then new songs come from that. So
Yeah.
yeah, they're part of that season of the story of it.
Yeah. And truly, like your songs that you wrote have something to do with your story, but then your songs are part of my story, which isn't your story. Like it's my story, right? So I
Right,
have
right.
my own season. I mean, I've got my pictures, I've got emotions, I've got experiences, the highs and lows. These are kinds of things that we're going to be talking about today, but your songs have somehow like detached from whatever it meant to you, and they're floating all out in the world among everybody's different stories. And
Yeah,
isn't that what worship songs do? They sort of like they attach themselves to our lives and in moments of our lives, and then they carry us through
yeah,
seasons. Like for me, it was these are the songs that brought me to a more, personal, intimate experience of worship with God. And also, I was in my early 20s. I had no girlfriend, no hope of a wife, no kids, wandering, wondering about my identity, all of these things that were going on when I was like 19, 20, 21 years old and trying to find myself, right? And so Well, what I wanted to talk about today with you, I know we're going to get to a place where we're going to talk about some very current things. You've got albums releasing, you've got this whole live experience that you're doing that's starting this weekend. I want to get there, but I want to like take a bit of a journey with you if you don't mind. And it's kind of like it's a personal thing for me too because you're a part of my story. And and I know you're a very humble person. You would never gloat on yourself, but I think it's stunning and amazing that to this day, you having like 4 songs in what they call the CCLI Top 100, which is kind of like a remarkable list of songs that the world is really singing, the nation, and for you to have that many songs that have sort of embedded themselves into the worship language of churches, I mean, you must also just step back and look at that and go, I don't know why me, but very few people even rise up into that kind of stature. So,
Well, it's a miracle, and it's a
yeah,
miracle of grace. And I'm a very ordinary person
yeah,
that just had out of my heart and out of the the earthiness of my own life,
yeah,
these songs came that were, intimate, honest, simple, and I sang them because I needed to sing them to kind of like stay alive and to
yeah,
spiritually connect with God.
yeah,
But I had no idea that all these other people would start singing them and own them as their own,
yeah.
you know. But
Can you
I've
take me to that moment when you sort of had to make this transition in your own life and heart to be like, these are not just songs that I'm writing for myself. Now suddenly it's gotten beyond your world of
yeah,
Langley. I mean, we're both, part of Langley, British Columbia in Canada. That's kind of our, I'm in
yeah,
Langley right now. You were in the Langley Vineyard. I don't even know if it
yeah,
went before then back to Anaheim or what was your world then. Tell me
yeah.
about that time.
Well, maybe this story will help anchor it in a specific how kind of like how come we're having this conversation, right?
Yeah.
So my wife Joyce and I got married when we were 19. When we were 23, we had our first child, our daughter Rachel, okay? And when Rachel's a few months old, I'm having this experience, right, as a new first-time dad. And I'm holding Rachel and I'm embracing her, and then I'm having this feeling like as I'm embracing her, I need this kind of embrace from my Father in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point in my life, spirituality, worship, religious services were very formal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there wasn't the expectation of tender intimacy. So I'm having this moment with my daughter, and this whisper comes into my head. Why don't you write this into a song? Kind of like this impression, like,
Mm-hmm.
why don't you sing this your desire to me? Like it's like the Father in heaven whispering to me. And so I do that. I pick up my guitar and I start this really simple, Father, I want you to hold me.
Mm-hmm.
And I start singing this song. And for 6 months, nobody hears that song except my Father in heaven and my baby daughter, right?
Right.
It's too intimate. It's too personal. It's too vulnerable to share. And but then what happens is we're doing a little Bible study group, and Andy Park, writer of In the Secret and other songs, is
Yeah.
our Bible study leader. And something that night happens about, they're looking at the passage about John 15, the Father heart of God and the Father wound in our culture. And Andy gets this impression, this, some would call a word of knowledge. He looks over at me and goes, Brian, I just get this strong impression that you've got a song related to this father hunger that is the right song for right now to close out this meeting. And I'm a I'm just an introvert. I'm a pretty shy guy, as you know, Ryan.
Yeah.
And I'm not the one to like bound on the stage and say, I've got something to share. I've got something to say. I'm the kind of guy that just hangs back and waits to be invited. And all of a sudden I'm like, uh-oh. But I go, you know, okay. So I sing the song to this group of a dozen people in the privacy of a home. And people start crying and they're identifying with it. And I'm thinking, well, cool. Well, that secret song I wrote, that was for them. That's really neat.
Yeah.
Okay, that's as far as it's going to go. I don't know. Okay,
Yeah.
so fast forward about 6 months later, I'm the bass guitar player. I'm on a worship team that Andy is leading, and we are leading worship for a vineyard conference led by John Wimber in Edmonton, Alberta, and there's 5,000 people present. Okay, and they do a session on the father wound. And they end the session on the father wound, and Wimber looks over to the side of the stage and says, hey, Andy, come on up here and sing a song while we start praying for people. And Andy looks at me and goes, you go and sing that father song over this crowd of people right now. And I'm like, the Muppet Show, Beaker, no, like, I'm a shot. Like, I don't even have my guitar here. I've got my bass guitar. Use my guitar. Well, guitar players, they have their guitar. If it's not, anyway, whatever. So I have to go up on this stage, and the leaders are like, "Why is this kid?" I call it, this 23-year-old walking up to the microphone to sing this song. So I do, and I eventually do, and I sing the song, and people are weeping all over the hall, and God's touching people. And John Wimber walks up to me afterwards and goes, that was amazing. He says, my father was an alcoholic. He left when I was 4 years old. I've been looking for a song like that says what my heart wants to say to God in such a tender, intimate way. Could we publish it? And I looked at him and I said, what's publish?
What's publishing?
Like, I had no idea. Okay.
We need more people like this back in our world today.
and then he says, do you have any other songs? Mm-hmm. And I go, oh, I've just written this song called Faithful One. I think maybe one other one called I Lift My Eyes Up. And he goes, well, if they're anything like that, we'll publish those too. And I went, okay, sure. Here, I think I handed him, here's my contact information and whatever, and I walk off the stage. So, these songs were just simple heart songs, right?
Yeah.
And to have people sing them when I'm not in the room is a very unique, special thing that wasn't expected at the beginning. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Brian, you were just, before we went live here, you must have your guitar somewhere close by. Like, I'm not. Mm-hmm. Can you, if you could show it, because I just want people to know this guitar actually, like, literally for 30 years, I saw that guitar. What's it called? What's the make of it again?
This is an Olsen.
An Olsen.
So shortly after I wrote those first few songs, a guy came to our church, the Langley Vineyard, heard me lead worship, and then God whispered to him. I was playing a pretty, I guess, crap guitar, mm-hmm. And he said, God just told me you need a new guitar.
Yeah.
Do you have a guitar that in mind that you'd like to order it and I'll pay for it? And I said, wow. Yeah, well, and I knew that Phil Kagi and James Taylor played an Olsen acoustic. I'd never tried one. I just said, an Olsen would be amazing. And ordered an Olsen, and the guy paid for it.
And you've probably worn through the wood a little bit with your pick over the years, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. Can you, let's see, I got to move it like this.
Yeah.
Up.
Yeah, I can see down below, so.
Yeah, you can see it's kind of gouged right. It's kind of gouged right through.
Yeah. Well, I've always loved the sound it made, and I think also what I loved is we live in an era now where there's so much big band and bass and tracks and things like that, and I do love all of that, but I also love the purity of just an acoustic guitar, and I love that that's kind of where it started with you is just simple chords, simple strumming.
Yeah,
It just sounds so
yeah.
great, so authentic. And there's definitely a part of me. Here we are now, 25 years into a very well developed, worship music industry, which I know it's swirling around you even here, 25 or 30 years later. But I definitely feel a drawing back to that kind of authentic place. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
so glad just to be able to talk to you as someone who started in that place where you're like, what is publishing? What, you want to hear my song? I mean, nowadays, anybody that's starting probably has to fight that battle of maybe I should write a song and then I'll put it on YouTube and hopefully, hundreds of people will hear it. And you're right
Yeah,
from the beginning, you're challenged with you know, all of those questions that you almost didn't have 25 or
yeah,
30 years ago.
yeah,
So,
yeah. And it's
so
a weird thing because in the end, it's the way that um, God has provided for our family, and I've been able
yeah.
to support Joyce and our six children this way. But I had no idea when I started out that it was even possible, and I keep on trying to keep my heart in that same simple place,
Mm-hmm.
just to trust and then express the simple songs that come to me, and then when
Mm-hmm.
they're not coming, I just have to be patient and wait
Mm-hmm.
and just serve and love
Mm-hmm.
and not be anxious. But I tell you, the whole, you said, the swirl of the whole thing is anxiety inducing, just the
Yeah.
way it works now.
Yeah. I know. But
So
we still need your voice, my voice to tell these stories and to keep anchoring it back into authentic worship life expression. That's even what I'm trying to do with this little YouTube channel that we're doing as I have conversations with people like you and just try to like dig under the surface and find that authentic life that comes through, and I know it's there with you. So I want to kind of move, we could just talk for so long on each of these seasons, but thinking in this theme of the highs and lows, I know that you have highs and lows, and I know you're a very authentic, vulnerable, kind of person. And I know there are seasons that, like, as we look towards that whole season in London, when Come Now Is the Time to Worship came out, it was all surrounded around a pretty challenging season. So could you just give us a little bit of a window of what the other side of it was? Like, I imagine, you start, you don't even know anything's going to happen, then you write these songs and suddenly there's all this
mm-hmm.
attention. It's
Yeah,
probably moving to a high,
yeah,
but but
yeah,
take us down the road a little bit.
yeah, yeah. So that's good. There were definite some high moments in the early, let's call them the early 90s. So
Mhm.
um, and that's when songs like Faithful One and Refiner's Fire and I Lift My Eyes Up um, took hold, and I started to get invitations. One of the moments that's etched in my brain is June 1993. I'm
Mhm.
invited to Germany. There's 5,000 people at this event. They were so excited to be there that when they would open the doors at the back of this outdoor kind of like tent that they'd laid down this wooden flooring on this field, it sounded like thunder as people would try and get to the front, and to literally just be right at the front, and then me and my band, we would start singing I lift my eyes up, and 5,000 Germans at the top of their lungs are singing along. They know every word. They know, you know, and I'm just like, I'm kind of like, how did this happen? I'd
Mm-hmm.
be in these different countries and I would walk into a room and they would be singing one of my songs in their language. They would have translated it and they didn't even know I was in the room sometimes. I would just sneak in incognito. So those are be like as a musician, as a creative person, and even as a worshiper, or somebody who longed for people to connect with God. Those were huge highs. And then you know, we by this point we had our third child, and our third child, Benjamin, was showing there was concern because he wasn't hitting any of the milestones, and we began to realize that something is not normal, and start the whole testing process, and eventually finding out he has Fragile X syndrome and will require care for the rest of his life. And meanwhile, all this connected to the father theme. I'm writing a musical with some friends called Father's House, and we launch that, and it goes really well at first, an initial real high. Like, we sell out community theater production of it. The album takes off worldwide. The soundtrack kind of album called Father's House. And then we try and go bigger with it, and it collapses, and we
Right.
lose like over $1 million. We lose our house. We're homeless by this point with
Oh
five
my
young
goodness.
children. We find out our son has Fragile X,
Yeah.
and we have nowhere to live. And then I'm offered a job to move to London, England, to train the worship leaders and songwriters for the Vineyard movement. And we arrive in England, kind of heartbroken, on the verge of bankruptcy, um, don't know a soul. And a few weeks into our time there, one morning I'm walking the streets of London, and it comes, come,
Yeah.
now is the time. And I remember this idea it was almost like audible, just like singing over me, all around me. And I remember looking up, like, now, you know, do you know what we just went through?
Yeah. Now
Are
is
you
not
for
the time.
real? Like, so it was like that song idea came at one of the low points, and then started a whole nother kind of season of rebirth, and the electricity when people started hearing that song, and they would pass through our church, the Southwest London Vineyard. This is before it was recorded. Like, they would be passing through our church, and they would come up on the stage, they would grab sheet music off the stage, and they would go to Africa and to Asia, and we started hearing reports of people singing that song all over the world, and it hadn't even
Yeah.
been recorded yet, you know
I feel like when that song came, it's like it injected some kind of new life into, this worship movement, if you want to call it, had kind of started, but then something triggered when that song, I'm sure there was probably other songs, like I don't know what was the year of Come Now Is the Time to Worship, because I'm just trying to like
So it
put
was
it into
written
a.
in the fall of 97, and the
Yeah.
recording was February 98. So it had started bubbling already in late 97, even before the
Yeah.
recording was the first recording. But by the time you hit middle to the latter part of 98, there was almost nowhere you could go in the church whether that song
It
wasn't
wasn't being
being
sung.
sung.
Yeah.
And it hit number one in CCLI for a brief amount of time.
Yeah. It was an era for me. I remember the song Shout to the Lord was a real breakthrough, like a world.
Hmm.
Like there were a few songs in that era where it's like they shifted things, or I
Yeah.
don't know, something happened, and that was a part of that season. But it's amazing to hear that for you that song came right in the midst of such a challenging season. And then there
Yeah.
was that album. Did that album Hungry get
Yeah.
recorded soon around then?
Yeah, so what happened was my job was to train songwriters and worship leaders from the about 75 churches um, in the UK and Ireland and Northern Ireland and Wales, and
Mm-hmm.
so Come Now's the Time was the first recording. It was live from London. I actually really resisted putting my own song on the album because I was there to train their worship leaders, but everybody was going crazy for that
Mm-hmm.
song, and my boss and my pastor says you absolutely have to do that song on
Mm-hmm.
this record.
Mm-hmm.
And it introduced like Brenton Brown to
Mm-hmm.
the church world with songs like Lord Reign in Me and All Who Are Thirsty, Catherine Scott. And then what happened was then the follow-up project 1 year later was the Hungry Project.
Mm-hmm.
And but those were both produced by me, and it was our team of just really me asking the the British, Irish, Welsh, Scottish friends that I was making, what's your heart song? What does your heart song sound like?
Right.
What's your mother tongue? We may share a language, the English language, because of the empire uh, from the past, but we come from different cultures. What's your heart song? What do you need to say to God in this season of your life and your nation? And the songs from those two albums was their response to that
Yeah.
question, really.
Hmm.
And then Hungry, so Come Now's the Time as a song kind of went everywhere, and the recording was doing well, but then Hungry came on the back of it, and it just went,
Yeah.
I mean, really big for when you think there wasn't really marketing or anything, and it
No.
sold like 400,000 units. So and it found its way into all kinds of places.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody on the chat
Yeah.
is
Is
just
asking.
asking, what is the story behind You Shine?
That's good.
Do you want me to answer that
Yeah, I
question now,
totally do.
Brian?
No, that's great. Thank you, Scott, for putting that in.
Okay, so interestingly, so I had these really intense, wonderful 2.5 years living in the UK, becoming good friends with people in the culture, and then it was a little bit heartbreaking, but they wanted me to stay for another 3 years to make it 5 years. But our eldest daughter, Rachel, who I told the story about before, she was on that cusp of entering high school, and we realized if we don't go back to Canada now, she's going to grow up as a Brit, and it'll be really difficult for her to leave. And we knew that ultimately we're Canadian, and we will end up back in Canada. And I've ended up literally, I'm talking to you from the house that I grew up in. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is deep roots here.
Yeah.
Uh, anyway, so we came back to Canada, and we were, for the first 6 months, we were heartbroken because we missed our British friends, and it had been so exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And here we were back home, but we didn't even know, okay, well, what do we do now? And God, what are you calling us to? And we were all completely disoriented. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started asking myself, well, how do I serve in my own local area, Abbotsford, the Fraser Valley, Langley? Like, how do I, okay, I'm disoriented, but how do I just roll up my sleeves and serve the church? And one of the things that was on my heart was that we needed to find fresh ways to unite together and work together on things, and not just compete, but actually work together. And so we were starting to some of these initiatives. One was called Love Abbotsford, where we served the poor, and we did it as churches working together. And we were preparing for this gathering of like all the churches from the city. And as I was praying, preparing for this gathering, I was drawn to this passage in Isaiah, where Isaiah is saying, why is it that you fear mortal man when I stretched out the starry host? And like this kind of like epic word from the prophet. And I've always struggled with fear of man. Like, it's just a normal part. I'm just a shy, introverted person who whatever. And I just walked over to my guitar and just, why should I fear, man, when you made the heavens? And then just the chorus, just, you shine bright, whatever, just opened
Mm-hmm.
up. And pretty soon I'm just like crying,
Uh-huh.
just weeping. It was like it hadn't been as long of a period of disorientation, but I had given up something really good for the sake of daughter and my children. Like I'd literally walked away from something that was like a mountaintop high, and
Mm-hmm.
everything was going incredibly well.
Mm-hmm.
But for the sake of my family, I thought, I don't, when we couldn't actually, here's another funny thing. There's no way, honestly, we weren't getting paid enough to live in London, England. We literally also could barely afford to stay there. So it
Right.
would have been like taking everything we had just to stay in that place. And so we came back to Canada. And, but out of that came the song You Shine. And then that was another song that seemed to spark with some people, and obviously it sparked with Scott because he asked the question.
Yeah. Well,
So
there's that. Then there's The Hope of the Nations was another,
yeah,
like, that's
yeah,
one of the
and,
songs that's still in that, top
yeah,
100 of today.
and that's
So,
my 9/11 song, right? So
oh, okay.
so I had written You Shine. I had walked. Oh, this part of the journey was interesting. Is when it was going the absolute best with Vineyard and Vineyard around the world. I felt like this whisper from God. In essence, I haven't just called you to serve one denomination, the Vineyard. I've called you to serve the church, and you need to let go of all of your formal roles at the Vineyard and just trust me for a pathway to serve the broader church. So that was all part of the move back, as I let go of all of my Vineyard stuff. And then one day out of the blue, Integrity calls up a guy named Chris Thomason, who was their VP at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and he called me up and he says, I remember I was working outside, just like about 100 feet from where I'm talking to you. I was working outside in the yard, and Joyce calls out the door, Brian, there's this guy from Integrity calling. He
Mm-hmm.
wants to talk to you. And I remember, so as a Vineyard raised guy, like Integrity is other. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
It's a different tribe. It's
Yeah, right.
completely
Yeah.
different, right?
Yeah.
Different culture, different everything. And I literally, as I'm walking towards the house to get the phone, this is pre-cell phones, right? I'm like, the answer is no. I literally just said that out loud. The answer is no. And as soon as I said it, I felt the Spirit whisper to me, why don't you ask me what I think? Dang. It's like,
Yes,
it's
right.
like, it's like, oh, yeah, right. Okay, Lord, what do you think? You
Yeah.
should go have this conversation. You should go with an open heart. Anyway, all that. Why I'm telling you this story is because, to make a long story short, is Integrity decides they want to do a project with me for the broader church, and it's probably going to be called You Shine, which it was in the end because that
Yeah.
song was kind of taking off, and they wanted to record it in Dublin, Ireland, live, because I had all these connections in the UK and I'd recently spent time there, and I loved the idea and they loved the idea. So I was scheduled to fly to Dublin, Ireland on 9/12 to 2001. Well, we all know what happened on 9/11.
Yeah.
9/11 happened, all the planes were shut down. And I had started writing a song called Jesus, Hope of the Nations, based on that passage, in his name the nations will put their hope. And I had written the verse, but I hadn't cracked how to finish the song. I'd written it the week before 9/11. 9/11 happened. And while I was sitting and watching the newscasts when I couldn't get on the plane, I picked up my guitar, literally watching the news, and started singing, You are the hope living in us. You are,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the rock. And I wrote the rest of the song. And then, eventually, months later, the event was delayed to February 02. We flew to Dublin and we recorded it live. And You Shine and Hope of the Nations are probably the two songs from that project that have gone on to have
Mm-hmm.
a longer life.
I didn't actually even know someone here brought up another song, Will You Love Me in the Winter? I don't even know that song. Do you?
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, it's not one of my most known one. Hey,
No.
Pete and Xana. Wow.
Yeah.
That's an awesome name. Pete and Xana, Justine. I wonder where
Tell us where you're from, Pete and Xana.
Yeah, tell us where you're from. That's the close. So I just told you about the beginning of my Integrity chapter in 01.
Yeah.
Okay? This song marks the end of my integrity chapter in 2010. So my A&R guy, Chris Springer, is on his way up to see me to finalize the song selection for an album called Level Ground, which turned out to be my final album with integrity before they kind of went through their whole metamorphosis and were
Mm-hmm.
sold. And I had all the songs picked out for the album and we were all good to go. And then Chris called me on the phone and he said, I'm so sorry, but my plane has been delayed. I'm going to be 3 hours. Oh my goodness. You came from Calgary and had Shy. You were one of the Christmas
Okay.
Kickstarter
There we go.
supporters.
Good for you. Thanks,
My
Pete.
goodness. So well, there you go. So good to see you.
All right.
Anyway, so Chris is delayed on his flight 3 hours, and I'm sitting there with nothing to do. All of a sudden, I have a free 3 hour block, and all of a sudden, I get this little whisper. Do you remember that idea you had way back in London, England, when I was living there and writing "Come Now's the Time" and those songs? I had this idea for a song one day when I was walking home from work, and it was the end of autumn and the last autumn leaf was just falling, and I had this picture that as autumn ends and winter begins, it's like a metaphor for as we move into old age, or we move into the end of a season, we're asking ourselves this deep question in our soul: will you love me in the
Yeah.
winter? Will you love me when I can't produce anything? This is what the human soul is asking of God. So I walk over to the piano, my hands fall on an F sharp minor chord, and I start singing. Changes bring a chill as the last leaves fall and the winter closes in. And I write the song, Will You Love Me in the Winter, on the piano in like an hour.
Huh.
An hour later, Chris Springer walks in the door, my integrity A&R guy. I print out the chart. I slip it into the middle of the stack, and I play him all the songs as if, you know, I they've all been with me for a long time.
Yeah.
And when I get to Will You Love Me in the Winter, he gets all quiet and he goes, oh yeah, he says, we need an honest, little bit lament song like this. And he says, when I hear this song, I hear Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. So, which was one of my mother's favorite piece of music. And my mother was actually in her decline. This was a little before her death. And
Mm-hmm.
so we, on the recording on Level Ground, we sing Will You Love Me in the Winter, and then it goes to Moonlight Sonata on the piano. And then Will You Love Me in the Winter, we were in the middle of a church war. I got creamed in the middle of it, and I went into a 5-year period where I lost my words and I stopped writing songs, and I entered a winter of the soul. And it was
Mm-hmm.
like I was writing this song for myself.
Hmm.
And because I needed it for the season I was about to enter. I think maybe, Ryan, you've discovered this as you talk with different songwriters and leaders around the world, but we tend to create things that we need before we even know that we need it. Because then this something happens and we go, oh, we need this song right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But some of us, when we're creating these songs, we don't know that we're going to need it. We just have this inspiration and we create it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like businesses too. People will have a business idea before it's time, then they'll create it, and all of a sudden it's the right time. So
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, so great to hear these stories, and I'm just amazed to hear again and again how it's the lows that trigger somehow. It's like the lows trigger the highs, or the lows
yeah, yeah.
trigger these
Wow,
world
I've
songs.
never thought of
And
it that way before, but that's
yeah,
probably kind of the creative journey and the
yeah,
spiritual journey, and how the heart of the Christian message is that life comes from death,
yeah,
and provision comes from surrender, and all of these things that feel like opposites, right?
yeah, yeah.
you know
It's good. Okay, I have one other little topic, or that I want just to hear some commentary from you on, because you're a person who has been so immersed in that kind of authentic, acoustic guitar when we barely knew what publishing was back in the day. And now we live in an era where, it's Spotify and Apple Music and YouTube, and it's a whole industry, and there's a lot of super great things that are going on, but it's just a different era. And I just wanted to ask you, like, what's it like for you? What's your sort of pastoral commentary on where we are today in the world of worship and church,
Mm.
and are there things that you love and appreciate, and are there things that you wish we could go back to? What's your personal commentary on that?
Yeah. I mean, you know, again, whatever I would say is only my perspective, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't advocate for returning to the good old days.
Right.
What I do advocate for is intimacy, is honesty, that I've always advocated for. And I fear that we have begun to practice intensity
Oh,
over
wow.
intimacy.
Okay.
And so, because intensity brings a certain, almost like a drug like payoff,
Yeah.
endorphins, feelings. And when we in when we get really intense and turn up the volume, and all the musicians are playing, and it's like this
Yeah.
wave of intensity, and then we think, in essence, kind of like, now we've worshipped because we've been really intense, and
Yeah.
this is a powerful experience. And there is a time, there is absolutely a time for intensity, but it's very, very hard to sustain.
Yeah.
Whereas
Hmm.
intimacy, vulnerability, tenderness is sustainable for a lifelong. And
Hmm.
I think, um, yeah, so I guess that would be one of my commentaries on what is going on. You know, don't put all of your value and your practices and your emphasis on intensity. Put it on true intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And true intimacy is hard to pull off without relationship, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
both that the relation, the vertical relationship with God, that you are unveiling your heart, your joys, your fears, your struggles, your hopes, and you are listening for God's response. And the thing is, I have a song out on my current hymns album, Hymns for Life. It's kind of like the lead single, called "I Heard the Voice,"
Mm-hmm.
and I was drawn to sing that hymn because I think actually that's really what it comes down to, that the very beginning of monotheism, of spirituality in the Judeo-Christian sense, came down to Abraham hearing a whispered voice calling him to leave his father's um, geography, but not. It wasn't about the geography. It was about the
Hmm.
culture of we'll say, just of destruction, of violence, of disregard, and enter and start to follow this whispered voice to learn a new culture, a new way. And this still small voice is such a thread, right, throughout the
Hmm.
biblical story and throughout all of our lives. And so that's where sometimes, again, I fear, if we practice intensity over intimacy, we actually even lose the still small voice, because we're listening for the shout. We're
Hmm.
listening for the that story of the prophet hiding in the rock, expecting to meet God in the earthquake, expecting to meet God in the dramatic, but after it's
Hmm.
all done, what is it?
Mm-hmm.
It's the still small voice,
The whisper. Yeah.
the whisper of the
Yeah.
Spirit. And I think when we are willing to calm ourselves and quiet ourselves, and do we hear the still small voice? Do we
Mm-hmm.
know that we're loved? Do we know what our calling is?
Mm-hmm.
I long for music that and songs of worship that draw me to that place, that centering place, that listening place, that tender place, um, because I believe the gentlest whispers can literally change the course of entire nations,
Mm-hmm.
and can undo the can move us from violence to peace, can move us from insecurity to security. I mean, think about it. Like, that whisper can happen any place to anybody anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the darkest prisons, to the mountaintops, to anybody. It's unstoppable.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to win the world by shouting louder than the world.
Mm-hmm.
um, we're going to bring change by loving deeper, by listening, um, to God's
Mm-hmm.
Spirit, and I think listening also to each other. Listening, what are you hearing? What are you hearing the whisper say?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
This is a nice comment here. Thank you for being so real and God's servant. Your music
Mm.
is my go-to so often and touches me deeply. So that's the story of how we're responding. And man, I think what you just said in response to a question where you could have gone on complaining about, big industry stuff or whatever, but to give us that nugget of intensity over intimacy is that's
Mm.
golden. I could make a whole nother video about that, or I think I'm gonna clip that out of today and send that around or something. It's beautiful, and
Mm.
I like that you're not even really saying that it's not like intensity is the enemy, but
No.
what I did hear, which I love, is that it's really hard to sustain intensity
Yeah.
and not so hard to
Yeah.
sustain intimacy. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that's one to take home. So okay, well, could keep going on this, but I just want to keep moving through the seasons as you're beautifully doing. I've got a screenshot here of your album. This is your latest contribution, Hymns for Life, which
Mm.
is it's a real dance with your father as well, which is kind of interesting
Yeah.
as you think about your whole history of the father's heart, and then you have your actual real father who has sung with you so many times,
Yeah.
and he's like
Mm.
that. I think he is anyways, that good old Mennonite brethren. Like,
Yeah.
I'm Mennonite,
Yeah.
we come from that
Yeah.
same sort of stock, both like Borscht and Veronica and Schwebach, right?
Mm.
So tell us a little bit about how do you come to a place where you're writing all these, vineyard songs that are like choruses and repetition and saying the same line over and intimacy with God, and now we're in this place of, the classic hymns. It's
Mm.
such a
Well,
contrast.
yeah, well, it is a contrast, but if you actually listen to the album,
Yeah.
you're going to hear intimacy, you're going to hear
All right.
tenderness, you're going to hear the still small voice,
Yeah.
you're going to hear a lot of the same things that I've always valued. Um, yeah, you're clicking through the charts there. I
Yeah, the
mean,
songs.
just as I am, my
Yeah,
mom's favorite hymn, I mean, just so tender. I'm so
for
pleased with how
sure.
that arrangement turned out. And in fact, that arrangement, I had hummed this melody to my producer, saying, "Hey, we should have like an instrument for an intro." I
Yeah.
hummed the melody, and he loved it so much, and me just humming it, just me, the vulnerability of me just doing that. It's literally on the album, like my
Huh.
demo hum
Yeah.
is what you hear. But it's like I'm not look, yes, I mean hymns have endured because they are they're firm, they are true, they've stood the test of time. But look, I mean, softly and tenderly, I heard the
Yeah.
voice. I picked songs and hymns that were still felt very much like alive in me, and when I would sing them, I didn't feel like I was putting formality in my mouth. Okay,
Right.
I
Right.
was carrying on being my heartfelt true self. And there's like hundreds and thousands of hymns I could have picked. So I picked 12 that really sing well, I think, in my personality, and my dad sings 4 of them with me. So yeah, it's like a dance with my father. He's 84 years old.
Oh, come
He's
on.
still
And now they're
singing.
asking for it on vinyl too.
Yeah,
So is
yes,
anybody
it arrived.
asking for, how about 8-track? Is it available
No,
on
no, no,
8
no, no,
track?
no, no, no. The vinyl records arrived yesterday,
Oh,
and I
there you
shipped
go,
out my
Pete.
first batch of vinyl today. So Pete
Okay.
and Xana, absolutely go to
Yeah.
briandoerksen.com/store and order a vinyl
Okay.
record, and we'll ship it right to your door.
Fun.
Um, but my dad sings 4 of them with me, and we I owe so much to those who have gone before,
Yeah.
and I want it. It's like being my 10th kind of solo project. It was almost like a debt of gratitude to sing these songs. And Ryan, I mean, I remember actually being with your dad
Mm-hmm.
on your property, listening to, together with him and some other people, listening to the Alan Jackson Hymns album.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have very distinct memories, and of course, he was so sadly taken from us
Mm-hmm.
quickly and suddenly last summer. But and I remember, and I remember almost even like the look on your dad's face as some of those songs were playing, like
Yeah.
they meant so much, right? But
Yeah.
they were done in an arrangement style that matched his generation and
Yeah.
his personality. And I'm trying to do this project in that same way. I'm trying to
Yeah.
represent both me and my dad, and
I heard
just
a
super
rumor
glad
about
I
that.
learned.
A rumor about that Alan Jackson album, and I'm not sure if this is true, but I heard that he had just recorded these songs for his grandma, or it was for his mom, but it was not meant to be like a big
Right.
published thing. And then, I mean, they are literally his most popular albums.
Yeah. Yeah.
This collection
Well,
of
isn't it
precious memories
isn't it
hymns.
isn't it ironic that today, the day that I'm releasing my hymns album, Carrie Underwood is releasing a hymns
Yeah,
album
yeah,
called My Savior, featuring some of the same songs like Softly
yeah,
and Tenderly. And I mean, there's part of me that goes, "Oh, great! Like my project just disappeared. The mega star is
yeah, right.
releasing. But I go, I think it's just a sign that maybe we're all going, boy, we need some of these songs still. Like
Yeah,
we just need them. We need to
yeah,
hear them in all kinds of ways.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
shout out to Carrie Underwood. I'm hoping to bring her on my YouTube channel, so that should boost my views. How about that, eh?
yeah.
We'll see if that can happen.
Oh
Okay,
man, yeah.
moving along just a little bit more now to kind of close things out. We're going to get right current in what's happening this weekend and all through next week. This live experience called Easter at the Shining Rose. You probably have to give us a little bit of background as to what's the Shining Rose, and then tell us about this experience.
Okay, well, I mean, simply, the Shining Rose is the creative space, the guest space here on the property where I grew up. And it has a stained glass window at one end,
Hmm.
fireplace at the other, and the stained glass window is
Well, there's the
roses
stained
because,
glass window right
yeah,
there, right?
exactly. There's the
Yeah.
stained glass window. And it's because my mother's passion and hobby was roses. It's a hobby of mine, is roses. And it was my wife's idea to call the Easter special at Easter at the Shining Rose, because, and I think the word shining just speaks of that resurrection hope. And the rose, of course, has got beauty, fragrance, and thorns. So
Yeah.
there's all kinds of Easter tie-ins, but it's very much about this place. And we tell the Easter story, but kind of in an unusual way, in reverse from the other side of the resurrection, kind of like Road to Emmaus. And then we weave some of my early songs, some of the hymns, and some Easter songs, like On That Sunday Morning, Scars on His Hands. And we do it with a group of friends, and
So there's
but,
like literally tickets for this. So what is a person getting a ticket for? To see what you've prepared?
It's a 1 hour online streamed concept concert film. Okay.
Yeah.
But if people watch it in real time with us on Palm Sunday at the release, at the premiere, they can do chat with us. So they can make comments and ask questions. And then if they buy the VIP all access ticket, they actually get a Zoom invitation to meet with me and some of the band members and cast members for an hour after the show is done. So it is pre-recorded, but and as you'll see it when you watch it, you'll realize why. It's like an actual film, and it has whatever. It's got really good audio, not like Zoom audio. Okay, like and then we have a meet, like a virtual green room afterwards for those that buy that extra layer and want to. In essence, it's almost like pitching in the tip jar for musicians who've had a challenging year. We can't do live concerts. We spend about $20,000 making the special. So we need to sell some basic tickets in order to even just try and break even. So that's why we're doing it. But we had a blast doing it, and we're really excited to show it to people.
Well, we're definitely coming alongside of you for this. We're doing lots of email promotion to our whole list. We're sending them all to PraiseCharts.com/Shining Rose. That'll take you to these pages that I was just showing you here, and you can grab one of a couple of kinds of tickets. And it's great, Brian. You're being innovative in a season where it's like none of us were expecting this year. It's been, it's been a rough swipe at PraiseCharts as well. We've had to just dig deep and get innovative because obviously churches aren't meeting, buying less sheet music and tracks. But, this is actually one of the things that I'm doing to be like, I just want to connect with people. I want to talk to artists. I want to have people chatting, old friends, and just, dig into people's stories and lives. And so you're helping me do that. So I appreciate that. I think I've got a couple of notes here. Okay, this actually, Paul. I got Paul joining me on Monday. He just texted me last week. He's like, "Hey Ryan, how you doing?" So I'm like, "Paul, let's just do this." So we're going to talk about how to be a long-term leader because he knows I'm on the verge of becoming a grandpa. I don't know. Are you a grandpa? I can't remember.
No.
You're not a grandpa, but you're definitely,
I'm old enough to be one.
Yeah, I know you are. I know. So there's that. And then, I'm doing another one about new music, but this one is about you. So I just want to make sure that everybody can see going to PraiseCharts.com/Shining Rose. And I think it's a great way to support you as a musician. Not just you, but it's like you have this little community of musicians, many of whom you stuck with for a lot of years. Brian Doerksen, he's like your bestie from when you were born, basically, right?
Yeah, we were 5 years old. Our dads were in a gospel quartet together.
So great. So great. Okay, well, we are just past an hour. Somehow we survived a failed YouTube start, but who cares about that? We've had people come in and stay all the way along, and I know that people are going to be watching this. This will be available for years to come. This is a beautiful thing, is immediately this is just in, the interweb of YouTube world, and people can watch it and share it, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. So I think that we've created real value, a great story, and just want to thank you for being faithful in the journey, Brian.
Well, thank you. Same to you. I sure appreciate your encouragement, and it's great to journey with PraiseCharts and you and the team. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, some good stuff is yet to come.
Yeah, it's happening now, and it's coming in more in the future. So
Yeah.
thank you. We're going to call this a wrap and just kind of go into the closing screens. But Brian, if you want to stick around for a couple minutes, then you can go back into the chat and say hi to a couple of people. Maybe if there's a few questions that people have and they can ask you, we'll do that for a couple of minutes just to kind of close out. And then please, if you are watching this and you want to share it around or subscribe to our channel, I'm looking forward to Monday. Partly, Brian, saying this to you because you've done like lots of ministry with Paul. You know his heart. He's such a great guy. You've done lots of training with him, and so I'm looking forward to that. All right, here's the wrap. Stick around for a few minutes, and we'll see you in the green room.